Hello. So we are going to talk about last week's DBQ. We had a practice DBQ last week on the Aztecs. It was our first 5-source DBQ, and hopefully it was fun and approachable. We're going to talk about a couple of celebrations and a couple of common concerns. So without further ado, let's just jump right into it. So first of all, let's start with the amazingly good. So honestly, the writing it is really astoundingly good, astoundingly solid. So few mistakes, and you're writing well. You're writing really fluidly. It feels like it's coming out naturally. So just more power to you. Thank your parents. And then the other thing that was amazing, I don't want to take credit for this, but it might have been the cheat sheets that helped us on the context, because man, the context was excellent. Remember, the best way to get the context is to think about 50 years before the period in the DBQ, right? So if you talked about Columbus and Cortez arriving in 1519 and all that, that's a little off, but at least it does still give something of the context. But the most important thing is 50 years before the subject of the DBQ itself. That's our context point. And man, some of these were excellent. The Aztecs were the strongest, most socially, technologically developed North American civilization. The strength of the Aztec capital, combined with the great population of the empire, made them develop at a much quicker rate. The empire lasted from, et cetera, et cetera. So this one is, it's a long context portion. You only get 1 point for it, but man, that one was nice. And that one did kind of lead right into the thesis. And so these other two are excellent. Both get the context point really clearly. Aztecs ruled much of Mesoamerica from those years. They talk about the Mexica. And then the third one, the Aztec Empire was a triple alliance of 3 Nahuatl city-states: Mexico, Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan. I love it. So honestly, the context roundly was excellent. So well done there. Some common concerns. We will talk about 2, I think. So, first of all, our thesis statements at this point are still a little bit too descriptive. Come on, Mac, catch up. Hello. There you are. So, the thesis statements are a little bit too descriptive. Now, here's the problem with that. If you start by saying something that's self-evident or obvious or overly descriptive, it is nearly impossible to earn the analysis and reasoning points, and it problematizes the evidence as well. If you look at the rubric for evidence and for analysis and reasoning, all of those points are dependent on your use of the sources to argue something. So here are some thesis statements that are not quite analytical enough. The Aztecs had several types of social development. True. That would get you the thesis point. So you might have gotten a thesis point and lost analysis point simply because you can write an acceptable thesis that doesn't do enough for our purposes. The Aztecs had a complex social life. That is true. Now, I'll bet before reading those documents, you probably already knew that, right? So the documents aren't informing a thesis point enough in these. The Aztecs and their allies conquered and took tribute, giving local governance responsibilities to the conquered peoples. Really well put, really nicely put, not quite argumentative enough. There's not quite enough to prove there. That one's awfully close. So remember, the essay requires you to support your argument using all 5 sources. Well, if your argument is overly descriptive, then there's not enough there to support. So let's move on. How can you support an argument that's overly descriptive? It's very difficult. Here's my hint. Spend another minute or 2 during the setup thinking about your thesis. So for this DBQ, the prompt asked you to assess the level of social development of the Aztec. So assess the level in this case means to evaluate, to discuss the value or the significance of it. So when I read through the documents and I think about the prompt, there are 2 groups that really emerged from me. Group 1 is that they all seem to be designing their social life to create order in their world. They are trying to order their world. 1, 2, 3, and 5 all seem to be talking about organizing their world. And group number 2, for me, order only seemed attainable through their faith. So they are a people who are seeking order, seeking meaning in their world, and they can only find that through their faith. So once I thought about those two groups, then I started to think thesis. What can I argue with those? And I came up with this. Although on first glance the Aztec rituals appear brutal or even inhumane, they illustrate a level of social development of the Aztec in 2 ways. First, the documents suggest that for the Aztecs, ritual and order determined their social life. Aztec institutions encouraged order. Second, that ordering of their social life was only attainable through faith. So we've got our 2 groups. They seem to go together to argue one point, and then we move on. So what we do with thesis is argue something that can be proven, argue something that someone can disagree with, that can push back on. If there's no tension in your argument, then it's probably might not even be an argument. And then the second, so are there any questions about that one? Raise your email. Or, reach out and we'll talk. The second one is the complexity point. This one is extremely difficult to get, and no one got it this DBQ. So don't worry about it. We're just moving forward. Number one thing you're going to do here, stop mentioning other empires. I know you did that because I told you to, but they interfere with the overall readability of the essay, and they don't accomplish the complexity point. So what does? Well, if you take one of those empires that you mentioned and elaborate fully on how that helps you expand on your argument, and use the documents and outside evidence to elaborate on this other people, then you're closer to the complexity point. It has to be a part of the argument. So you're taking your argument, point number 400, about why the thesis statement is so important. It has to be a part of your argument, not just a phrase on its own, not just, and here are the Aztecs, and all of a sudden, and here's this other group. You just drive by. No, we can't have drive-by allusions here. Using outside evidence, elaborate in a separate paragraph on a couple sources. Do I see hands going up saying, 45 minutes? Dr. Schmal, it's 45 minutes. How can we do that? Yeah, I agree. It's a very difficult point to get. One way you can do that is by refuting your own argument. I've just argued in this beautiful essay all of these completely provable things, and I might be completely wrong. Look at this outside group, another group in another continent or another time period that it is a very difficult point to get. Why is it so difficult? Well, all you have to do is just write analytically brilliant, nuanced, complex stuff. That's all. It's very difficult. So you must move beyond the straightforward reading and find something beyond. A lot of you, I believe you had Hindu cults of Vishnu and Shiva in your cheat sheets. I think that's why so many Vishnu and Shiva drive-by references came in. I'm assuming those were the ones built during the Khmer Empire from the 800s to the 1400s. They're found now in Angkor Wat, which was originally devoted to Vishnu. But what else? Well, maybe this is about religion and sacrifice. Once there was a tree, and she loved a little boy. This reminds me of The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein. Let's go into that. And so then you get into that concept of sacrifice. Frankly, isn't most religion about sacrifice also? Present your bodies as living sacrifices to God, it says in Romans. Or unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. Death and sacrifice, they are not so strange as it seems when we look at all this sacrifice amongst the Aztecs. It's very common in literature. Maybe as you're writing along, you think of Diego Rivera's 1945 painting Tenochtitlan, and you just think of the beauty of that. And so you expound on how the art world actually proves your point. You can see some chinampas back there. You see some of their organization and their architecture, the way their architecture expresses the order and meaning of their universe. So what you're doing is expounding on a theme in a way that broadens the topic and captures something unique. Here's some more Diego Rivera just for fun. I hope this helps. we'll meet this week. We'll keep thinking DBQ, and love you all. Bye.